You are listening to the Wyn Thomas File.
And time for another guest on the show. That is Karen Brace and her new poetry collection called Waking the Witch and Other Poems. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Wyn.
The collection of poetry is based on shamanism. Tell us what it is.
So it's a really wide subject, really, because shamanism and all of those esoteric things that I write about, they're worldwide, really, and they date back right from the dawning of us and our previous ancestors, like our Neolithic folk. So even if you look back into the history of mainstream religious places like Canterbury Cathedral, Canterbury is actually built on a site in Kent that had Neolithic kind of ritual remains when they did an archaeological excavation. So shamanism and kind of the practice of, I suppose, what I call traditional folk magic dates back to our oldest ancestors.
So that was it. That's what it means to you, is it, personally?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, folklore, traditional folk music, spiritualism, and the occult. Tell us what they mean to you.
Spiritualism, I grew up in an environment where one of my grandparents, her family had been spiritualists. So they were old school spiritualists from sort of the Victorian era, which is a fascinating area when you get into it. But I've always been tuned into spiritual activity, I suppose. So all sorts of things, really, from seeing things to sensing things to hearing things that not everybody sees or hears. The occult obviously is often seen as kind of Hammer horror style films. If you say the occult, people go, "Oh, you're right, like Aleister Crowley then." No, and I don't run around the woods with a tea towel on my head either. It's a bit more, I kind of tend to lead people more towards W.B. Yeats's poetry and that kind of more esoteric spiritualism. And, yes, the occult can be very driven by those stereotypes. But I think people have got a bit of a hang up about the negative perceptions of the occult, because it kind of, obviously, that's been a good money spinner in its day, hasn't it? And people of notoriety like Aleister Crowley obviously followed a very distinct path of his own. But yeah, I guess it's all encompassing, isn't it? Because anything to do with magic, to do with the otherworldly, to do with spirits, to do with ghosts, to do with entities that we don't understand, all comes under that umbrella to some extent. It
has, but I say in modern times it's become a sort of connection to evil as opposed to goodness, isn't it? Yes, indeed.
It has. Yeah. Everybody thinks of The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, don't they? Or the Omen, which, I have to say the original Omen is still one of the best films that I've ever seen. But, I'm biased.
Okay, let's go on to the collection, Waking the Witch. Let's look at some of the poems there, if you don't mind me asking you about those. Okay.
Of course.
Let's pick one out. Which one I liked was The Red Goddess, which has a line. In older than writing of men.
Yeah. So The Red Goddess, interestingly, that was one that I picked possibly to read for you today.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
That was my choice.
That's fine. Yeah. We can still do that.
Yeah. For me, I think The Red Goddess really comes from a place, as some of my writing does, from a place of wanting to celebrate the divine feminine that has been kind of squashed. And, at one time, our ancient ancestors would have embraced all of that pantheon of goddesses worldwide, whoever they were, wherever they were, whether it was Morrigan, whether it was Isis, whether it was Inanna, whether it was Babylon. And then obviously with how the world's moved and how religion as we came to know it moved, many of those things were kind of sidelined or used in the production of what we see as the more mainstream religions today. So, the red goddess, Babylon in the ancient, most original setting was an entity, not just a place, and traditionally she's regarded, there is a strain of thought that regards her as the entity that was then kind of purveyed as the whore of Babylon in the Bible.
Right.
So, it's kind of how you get, I guess it's my inner suffragette, Wyn. What can I say?
Well, I think that without women, we wouldn't be here, would we? I mean, they'd always decried.
Absolutely not.
They always classed, sometimes in some religions, as second-class citizens. But without a woman, we wouldn't be here, would we?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are many sort of, scholars that would disagree with me, and, many people that would want to take issue with, that thought. But I think when you look at the divine feminine and how the divine feminine was used, and how many, strong shamanic kind of women there were in tribes. I went to an exhibition a couple of years ago at the British Museum about Stonehenge, and what they'd done was they drew upon the collections of Northern Europe, and they brought pieces over from different museums across Europe. And there was this wonderful case that had the burial of a female shaman from a tribe in northern Germany.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And she could only have been about 25 or 26 when she died. But she was decked out in like such finery for the time. And, I looked at her and thought, actually, firstly, within her lifetime, she was regarded as a powerful and influential woman. And the second thing that occurred to me was that when she reached Valhalla, or she crossed the veil, her ancestors were really going to know she'd arrived, because they'd really kind of, dressed her to the best, just as they used to with, men that they regarded in their community. But this was a woman, and we don't always see that reflected, I don't think. So if my writing can do that a little bit, then I think that's all to the good.
Right. I must ask you, obviously, with the title, which is Waking the Witch. So is that your occult bit again?
Well, I think Waking the Witch, witches, in the last few years, particularly through the lockdowns and the pandemic, sort of traditional folk magic practices, which, let's be honest, traditional folk magic really is aromatherapy, it's healing, it's nothing that we didn't know. It's just around, how it's titled. It was, every third person was popping up on the internet with, doing this or doing that. And I thought, actually, there's so much more to it than that. And, it's not a coincidence that it happens to be part of the title of an absolutely brilliant record by Kate Bush back in the day, who I loved when I was much younger, and was one of the records that I actually spent my first proper pocket money on buying a vinyl copy of on single, because I love her music and I admire her greatly. But for me, I think Waking the Witch is actually about waking yourself up. It's about, it speaks about waking your inner intuition up and not allowing yourself to tune out, but to tune in. Most people have got some kind of interdimensional kind of abilities if they choose to tune into them. But I think a lot of people, because they are perhaps wary of it, or they're afraid of it, or they only see that negative connotation that is, spoken about or shown in film, actually they shy away from it. So that's really where that title came from.
Well, I believe staying with witches, because I thought the burning was quite an impact of what I thought was witch burnings many, many years ago, when the poor women were, if they were in some kind of a group, they were considered to be witches. So do you think it's that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that for me kind of, again, came at a time when I think the women's movement, and, you know, I do have a distant relative who, you know, she did chain herself to railings outside Downing Street and got arrested fighting for the right to vote, you know, back in the day. And all of those women who have gone before us, you know, whether they are writers like Maya Angelou or, you know, people that protested and got themselves arrested, you know, like the Pankhursts, you know, all of them, to some extent, the world has not moved on in many ways. And, you know, we might not build those fires anymore, but people are still being not given the due kind of rights that they should be because they are women. But the burning is about so much more than that, really, because it's not just about women. There are so many minority groups and people that are marginalized, and their voices are not necessarily being heard.
Right.
You know, maybe because they're different, maybe because, you know, and there's a whole list of reasons that we could go through why people, you know, are silenced because they're different.
Right. Let me just jump in there before you go on, because I want to get another one in just before we go to you doing the read for us. And this is completely different, really, from the rest of what's in the collection, I believe. And it's Go Tell the Bees. Something different?
Yes.
Environmental dangers, yes?
Yeah. Well, that's actually directly drawn from a piece of Cumbrian folklore. So in Cumbria, old Cumbrian folklore, which is another great love of mine. So a lot of the poems have got, like Selkie Heart also is a piece of folklore. There's another poem that I've written that's not actually in this collection called 5 Fathoms Deep, which is about the sort of the folklore around the coasts of Cornwall and Scotland about the mer people and, you know, people that live between the land and the sea. So with Go Tell the Bees, in Cumbria, they believed that when a person in the community passed, you went and you told the bees so that they could go and tell the news to the local community, and they could fly across the distances and spread the news from beehive to beehive. And then the tradition was, after you'd had the wake or the funeral breakfast, that you then offered the tablecloth with the crumbs and anything else on it to the bees. To sustain the life of the village.
Okay. Right then, as you said, I want you to read one for us. We did talk about the Red Goddess. Do you want to do that one for us?
Yeah, I will. I'll do this. So, the Red Goddess. Ancient invocation, older than the writings of man, goddess of revelation, defamed and devoured by the ones who claim to be holy, mother of the sacred blood, warrior of the red tent, most perfect in power passionate, in living magic and the transcendental power of love, Babylon the mighty, Babylon the brave, Red Goddess, forever in my veins.
Wow. Certainly an impact when you read it, that's for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the next collection is due out as well, is it, next year as well, is it?
It is, yeah. I'm working on that now.
So how can you get this collection now? How is it available?
So this collection is currently available on Amazon Kindle, and it's also available on amazon.co.uk and amazon.com for my friends in the North American and Canadian territories in paperback.
Lovely. Okay, lovely. There we go then. Well, that's absolutely wonderful. Thanks for being with me. I know it's a kind of an ambition yours to get a collection in print. So that's you've succeeded in doing it, haven't you?
I have, and that's been such a joy, because it just, you know, when I was about 7 or 8, I read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and I always wanted to be Jo. I wanted to be the one that wrote books. And it didn't matter that she didn't have the fancy frocks, and it didn't matter that she, you know, had the cool boyfriends. I just wanted to be Jo.
That's wonderful. Well, that's absolutely brilliant. Thanks so much for being my guest today. That's Karen Brace, and her book is called The Waking of the Witch and Other Poems, and I say it's available on Amazon. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you, Wyn.